Good morning, Senator. Obviously,
Good morning.
a lot of breaking news this morning. I don't know if you just had an opportunity to hear Barbara Starr's reporting from the Pentagon, but just to recap, they have been on something of high alert overnight because they say that they got intelligence that Iran was moving around equipment. It made the Pentagon believe that they would be targeting U.S. forces, perhaps in Iraq, perhaps in Kuwait, perhaps with drones equipped with missiles, as we had seen in the Saudi oil attack. What can you tell us about this?
Well, I don't have independent information about it, but I will say it's to be expected. We have seen an escalation by President Trump, particularly with Iran, that is unfolding in a way that creates an alarm for many of us that we are on a march to an unauthorized war, which is why Senator Schumer and I asked for the president to declassify fully his war powers notification to the Congress. I think the American people need to know the essence of what that says so that they can make their independent judgment. The last thing we need is another weapons of mass destruction moment in American history. And I haven't seen anything that ultimately indicates that killing Qasem Soleimani at this point in time stopped an imminent threat and or made America more secure without the planning and for the aftermath of this. So those actions that Barbara Starr talked about ultimately are clearly to be expected.
So you've not seen any intelligence that suggests to you that Soleimani was planning an imminent attack, but you haven't been briefed yet.
Well, the War Powers notification has some elements of that. I would just simply say tomorrow there's an all-members briefing, and we'll get further details. I intend to press, as I did when I was in the House on the Iraq War and voted against it, I intend to press them on the intelligence to understand the nature of it. Because the key here is what was the imminency of the threat and why did taking Soleimani out specifically deal with that imminency? Obviously, to the extent that there was anything being planned, others had to be involved. You would think that you would be dealing with others and the way to carry out that attack, that one individual alone maybe postpones it, but it doesn't eliminate the threat. And so the immediacy of the nature has to be defined for Congress so that we understand why the president took this action, because in the absence of that, in the absence of facts and intelligence to establish that, then I think the president's actions would have been unlawful.
Well, the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, was on television this morning giving a little bit more information about that underlying intelligence. So let me play that for you.
I can tell you that there were plans that were being made and that Soleimani was in the midst of that plotting. That's why he was traveling in the region to Damascus and Beirut and Baghdad to conspire with people to attack American facilities that contain diplomats, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardmen. So the president was very concerned about that activity. Soleimani and the Iranian regime knew exactly what they were doing.
Okay, so there were facilities being targeted, he says, that contained American diplomats and soldiers. What's your response?
Well, we'll have to see exactly what was the essence of the intelligence and the integrity of that intelligence to establish that. But that in and of itself isn't something new as it relates to Iran or Soleimani. And obviously he himself wasn't going to carry out these attacks if those attacks were imminent. So the question is, why didn't you target the very essence of those groups within Iran, military groups within Iran, that could have carried out any such attack? And how strong was that intelligence and how imminent was it? And so I need to see the intelligence to be convinced, because we have history already that establishes that sometimes this intelligence is aggressively looked at one side to promote a purpose, but doesn't substantiate itself under the garish light.
So what if the intel doesn't satisfy you tomorrow? What if you do conclude that the president acted unlawfully, as you have suggested is possible? Then what?
Well, this is why I'll be sitting today with Senator Kaine, who's introduced a War Powers resolution as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It seems to me that we need to constrain the president while making sure the language protects our troops in the region, but constrain the president from being able to act in the absence of any threat immediately to our troops in the region in a broader conflict without an authorization from Congress for the authorization for the use of military force that comes in the first instance before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that has jurisdiction on that issue. We cannot have a march to an unauthorized war. And the escalation from the missile attacks inside of Iraq and Syria to the ultimate targeting of Qasem Soleimani, to the sending of thousands of troops, all of this without authorization is a march that has to be stopped, and the Congress has to be engaged in deciding whether or not it is in the national security interests of the United States to authorize any military force.
But in terms of the bottom line of having killed Soleimani, you have been a frequent critic of the Iran regime, and Soleimani is universally seen, well, in the United States at least, as a terror mastermind. So when you heard that President Trump gave the order to have him taken out, were you relieved?
Well, look, Soleimani was a terrorist. He is the cause directly and indirectly for the loss of hundreds of American troops through their surrogates and through the development of IEDs that killed Americans, soldiers in Iraq. I will shed no tear for him. But the question that two previous administrations, Republican and Democrat, both faced is targeting Soleimani and taking him off the battlefield more valuable than the consequences that flow from that decision. And both President Bush and President Obama came to a different conclusion. So the question isn't whether or not we weep for Soleimani. We don't. The question is whether what unfolds now was ultimately in the national interest and security of the United States.
Do you know what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo plans to say at 10 a.m.?
I don't. I have not talked to the Secretary. We've reached out for the State Department, but I have not talked to the Secretary. I don't know if it's about his political ambitions or whether it is about Iraq.
That would be interesting if he had just called the press conference just to talk about his political ambitions. But in any event, none of us know. So we will see at 10 a.m. Senator Bob Menendez, thank you very much for coming on New Day.
Thank you.